Hello and welcome to our webcast, Indirect Tax Automation Solutions, is yours right for your business. I'm Kostuma Chowdhury and I will be facilitating today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to make a couple of announcements. Please direct all your comments and questions to the Q&A tool, and we will try to address them at the end as time permits. This event is being recorded and we will be sending out an email notification when the recording is available to watch. That concludes today's announcements. I will now introduce our presenters. Our presenters today are Shanice Omari, who is a Research Manager at Vanson Bourne, and Roger Lindelof, who is our Business Development Director at Vertex. I will turn it over to today's first presenter, Shanice.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. As Kostuma mentioned, my name is Shanice Omari and I'm a Research Manager at Vanson Bourne. Just to give you a bit of background in terms of what I do, I've spent my research career managing and delivering a wide range of research projects across many different sectors. And at Vanson Bourne specifically, we specialise in market research covering technology elements across all business sectors and major markets. So for this research piece, we've been working alongside Vertex, and we'll go through much more of those details shortly. And in the meantime, I'll hand over to Roger to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Shanice. My name is Roger Lindelof. Welcome, everybody. My background is an SAP consultant for almost 35 years now. Done all the modules in SAP, but in 2004 I got stuck with the VAT determination in the SAP systems, and since then that never let me go. So I'm now in the industry for indirect VAT determinations for about 17 years. Joined Vertex in 2020 as the Business Development Director for Europe, and I'm still helping Vertex grow in Europe.
Lovely, thank you, Roger. So in terms of the agenda for today, what we're going to cover in this webcast, the focus of this research was to really understand some of the key challenges faced by organisations. But we'll start off with some research background, so giving you some information about the demographics and the people we spoke to. We'll then go into more detail about VAT issues specifically that organisations are currently facing. And we also delved into the different perspectives of departments. So firstly, we looked at IT versus finance and tax departments. So we'll go through that in much more detail through this webcast. And finally, we'll wrap up with a Q&A section where if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in and we'll cover as many as we can at the end. So in terms of a bit of background then, so we spoke to 420 respondents. As I mentioned previously, finance and tax as well as IT, so we had that split between those two. And we covered 5 main regions across Europe. So the research coverage had coverage of those 5 regions, the first being Germany, Austria and Switzerland, followed by the UK and Ireland. We also had coverage of France and the Nordics, and finally Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg. So a range of region coverage there. And also we had coverage of global annual revenue. So we spoke to fairly large size organisations here with global annual revenues of 100 million plus. So you'll see across the board, we had a fair range there in terms of spread of global annual revenue. And also you'll see here that we spoke to a range of different sectors as well, from IT, technology and telecoms, right through to business and professional services as well. So really getting those perspectives across different sectors. And also, as I mentioned previously, we were really interested in understanding the different perspectives across departments. So you'll see that split on the right there in terms of finance and tax and IT as well. So jumping into that was a bit of background in terms of who we spoke to, jumping into the first discussion point. So what we've seen across the board is that a multitude of organisations are currently facing challenges. We've got 98% who we found are currently facing at least one VAT issue. And in terms of the specifics behind that, we found that 38% find handling multiple jurisdictions a key VAT challenge within their organisation. Roger, do you have any immediate thoughts on this at all?
Yeah, thank you, Shanice. I think this response doesn't surprise me at all. When I first saw this, I was already expecting this. People are working with an SAP system, and that SAP system is not really designed for real complex VAT issues. So if you are handling multiple jurisdictions, then you are handling all kinds of complexities in your VAT setup in the SAP system. SAP has designed its VAT determination, I think, in the 80s, so about 40 years ago, and never really updated their functionality in the SAP system. There are a couple of good reasons. I will come back to that later on, but we are basically now still dealing with a functionality that was designed 40 years ago, and we are trying to solve complex issues that are emerging today in the EU VAT directives, especially. And you saw that also in the respondents. We are really concentrating also on the EU here. And you see that the EU directives are quite complex. You have a lot of VAT rules, a lot of exceptions there. And then you see that also in Europe, a lot of countries have their own views on those rules. They have implemented the EU directives in a little bit different way. And SAP never really added any of those complexities into their SAP system. So I'm not surprised at all that you see that so many people have problems in handling multiple jurisdictions, and that even almost all the respondents have at least one VAT issue in their SAP system. So it's no surprise at all for me to see these results.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Roger. That's very insightful. So just carrying on to that theme then, still looking at the challenges, the next top challenge we're seeing is 34% finding it challenging to keep up with legislative changes. And you'll see on the right there, that graph, it's only 4 percentage points behind that top key issue that we saw in terms of handling multiple jurisdictions. So we're really seeing the scale of this issue as well. Roger, do you also have any thoughts on this finding as well?
Yeah, again, like also the previous outcome, it all relates back to the history of SAP here. We are working with a 40-year-old design that is not kept up to date with the latest legislations. So if you look at also the upcoming changes, for example, the 2021 e-commerce changes, the COVID changes that are bound to happen, maybe we go into a definite VAT system in 2023. Looking back at the past changes, Brexit, for example, the 2020 quick fixes, I think the 34% that now states that they have difficulties in keeping up remodeling their legislative changes, I think that will only increase in number. More and more companies, I think, will have more challenges in the years to come. Also, if you think about the move to e-filing, e-invoicing, e-audits, etc., that's all increasing the complexity, and everything needs to be reported faster to the authorities. And the faster the data needs to be shared with the authorities, the more complex it becomes, as there's no really time to do any corrections or checking your results in the VAT determination. So I think it just will increase this number. If you would ask this in the next 2-3 years, if everybody stays on the standard SAP functionality, then you will see that 34% will only go up in the next years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Roger. Okay, so those were two of the biggest VAT issues that organisations are facing at the moment. We'd love to put this out to the audience now to understand what is the biggest VAT issue your organisation is currently facing at the moment. So we'll give you around a minute for the poll to answer this, and then we'll reveal the results. So the question is, what is the biggest VAT issue your organisation is currently facing? We've got A, handling multiple jurisdictions, B, remodelling to keep up with legislative changes, C, the impact of the COVID pandemic, D, accounts payable VAT determination, and E, a lack of understanding from the IT department about what is required. So we'll just give you some time to answer that. Okay, we'll give you about 20 more seconds for those results to come through, and then we'll reveal the answers. So what is the biggest VAT issue your organisation is currently facing? Okay, so we've got some results through. Let's have a look and see what we've got. So perhaps no surprise, and it really does actually align with the research findings that we found. We've got handling multiple jurisdictions coming out at the top there, 42.9% to almost 43%, over 2/5, believe that that's the key VAT issue. We've also got remodelling to keep up with legislative changes. As previously mentioned, that's also something that came out. That was the second biggest challenge for organisations in the research. We've also got accounts payable VAT determination coming out there at just over 1/5, and lack of understanding from the IT department about what is required. So all very interesting results, a fairly good spread there. Obviously, we haven't got any in terms of impact of the COVID pandemic, but we can see across the board that there are a range of issues that are being faced at the moment with VAT. Thank you all so much for participating in that. So just to give you a bit of context in terms of what we found, so as previously mentioned, those two purple bars on the left are the two key issues that we've discussed in quite some detail with you. Third down, we had the impact of the COVID pandemic, but as you all answered as well, we've also got issues with accounts payable VAT determination, and also a lack of understanding from the IT department about what's required. We've also got a range of other challenges that we found here across the board, as you'll see in the chart, and only 2% who aren't facing any issues. So you can see the real scale to which issues are being faced at the moment. Okay, so carrying on then with this theme about the VAT issues that organisations are currently facing, as previously mentioned, we have had organisations who are experiencing a lack of understanding from the IT department about what is required. We've got 29% of respondents from our research who believed that was the case. And I'll now hand over to Roger to share his thoughts on why this could be.
Yeah, that's a classic example, I would say, IT department not really understanding what the requirements are. It's quite a natural issue that is arising in the companies, because everybody has a different background. So if you look at a VT manager, they are normally have a degree in law. They have got a completely different background and a completely different understanding of VT than what an SAP consultant or an SAP developer would understand from those rules. So if you talk with an VT, they are talking about articles, and they are talking about intra-community supplies of goods and revert charge and these kind of things. And then an SAP consultant has a completely different background and is not used to that language. And I try to express that a little bit with a dog and cat story. You see if an SAP functional consultant is talking to a VT manager, and you see on the right-hand side that a tax manager is talking about a certain dog. The more he's talking about the VT requirements, the more different the interpretation becomes in the SAP consultant's mind. So you see that if you are talking just with a VT manager and an SAP functional consultant, that there's already quite a difference of understanding of the requirements appearing. If then that SAP functional consultant needs to talk with the SAP developer, then you are talking to a real programmer, so somebody who is writing code in the SAP system. That SAP functional consultant has again also a completely different background to that SAP developer, and also there you will see that there's a difference in how that is perceived at the SAP developer, what the SAP functional consultant is then talking about. When that SAP developer starts building something, he's ready. He will create whatever he understands is the VT rule, and then that functional consultant is going to explain that to the key user. And you see that key user then also gets again a different understanding of the VT rules. So if you look at the end result, the VT manager has created a requirement, has explained what the VT rules are, and if you then see what is actually happening in a business, it's of course not always like this. You also see a lot of things going right, but a lot of times you see that whatever that VT manager had in mind, it's completely different translated into the coding of the SAP system, and then you really get a problem because the VT manager thinks that he explained it very well to the SAP consultants. The SAP consultants think that they really got it correctly understood and built that correctly into the system. And the key user thinks that the system is working correctly according to what the key user understood from that requirement. But then what you then see as an actual result in the SAP system, a VT manager cannot check if the coding is correct because he can't read that coding. The key user doesn't know what the exact requirement was, so you will very often see a clash here in how VT rules and VT requirements are solved in the SAP system. And that is very often if you do, for example, a risk review at a customer and you would check the data, then you will see that there are a lot of results incorrectly coded in the SAP system, which go unnoticed by VT managers. And this is really quite an issue if you are talking different departments. They all talk a different language there.
Perfect. Thank you for explaining that, Roger. Okay, so another poll for you guys in the audience. We really wanted to get your own perspectives in terms of VAT becoming more complex for organisations. So what we'd like to ask you is, to what extent do you agree or disagree that VAT is becoming more complex for organisations? We'll give you a similar amount of time as we did with the previous poll to put your answers in here. So you've got strongly agree, slightly disagree, and strongly disagree. So to what extent do you agree or disagree that VAT is becoming more complex for organisations? Just a bit more time on this one. So what extent do you agree or disagree that VAT is becoming more complex for organisations? Okay, so we've got a good number of responses coming through there, so I'll just reveal the results here. So it's perhaps no surprise that we do have a majority agreeing with this, that VAT is becoming more complex for organisations. We actually have over half who strongly agree with this notion, which is really interesting. We do have a small proportion who strongly disagree with this, but as you can see across the board, we have got most agreeing that VAT is becoming more complex. And in terms of how that aligns with what we found in our research results, you'll see that top bar there, we've got 84%, so really, really strong finding there in terms of those who agree that VAT is becoming more complex. So across the board, that's definitely the case in terms of what's coming out here. We've also got splits by department. So I know I mentioned at the beginning we were really interested in finding out those differing perspectives, and we have got more within the finance and tax department who agree with the statement that VAT is becoming more complex for organisations versus 80% of IT. So we are seeing less within IT departments who feel that's the case. Roger, just putting this out to you, do you have any ideas as to why this could be, why we're seeing the difference here?
Yeah, I think it's quite natural for IT not to see the VAT issues as complex as finance people would see. IT is very often under the impression that give it enough time and give it enough resources, we can code basically everything in the SAP system, and that would solve then everything. If the VAT rules would be black and white, so if there really would just be a manual and that would state these are the VAT rules and this is how that should work, then I would agree with the IT that it could all be coded in the SAP system, and any IT person would be able to do that. But since we have so many exceptions to the rules, so I started in the beginning also with that story, like we have an EU directive and that EU directives displays certain VT rules, then the countries can have their own interpretations of those rules and sometimes can pick, I don't want to implement this rule and I want to implement that rule. So there's already a lot of variation in there. But if you then look into a country, I sometimes speak to German advisors. If I speak to German advisors in the north or speak to German advisors in the south, then you sometimes see even a different opinion about the same VT rule. So a VT is not really black and white, and because it is not really black and white, you can't really just code everything in the SAP system and then say this is all solved. So that is where I think that this difference comes from, that finance is more aware of the complexity than the IT persons are, because they really think that everything can be coded in the SAP system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Roger. And just following on from what you've said, looking at further disparities between departments, particularly in terms of organisations finding VAT recalculations challenging, we're seeing bigger differences between departments here. So just following from what you said, we've got 81% within finance and tax departments who agree that sometimes VAT recalculations can be challenging, versus just 69% of ITs. We're seeing even larger differences between the two there as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so that wraps up in terms of the main content for the webcast today. I can see we have got a few questions within the Q&A portal, but please feel free to add any more and we'll have a look through as we go. In terms of the first question we've got here is there any way we can get more information on the report findings? Absolutely. So we're currently in the process of putting together a white paper, which will be released soon and will feature the research findings in much, much more detail than we've given you today. So absolutely keep your eyes peeled for that. What else have we got here? So question number 2, we are only migrating to S/4HANA in 2024/2025. Do you expect SAP will have implemented by then a VAT solution in S/4HANA? Should we wait for that?
Yeah, I think I will take that question, Shanice. Like we saw in the last 40 years, also in the upcoming S/4HANA versions, there's no plans from SAP to really add something to the S/4HANA systems. I actually heard a rumor last week, and I still need to verify that with SAP, so don't quote me on that, but there's already rumor that they want to stop supporting the VAT reports in the SAP system and want to move to ACR. I'm going to check that, double check that with SAP, but that seems to be the trend in the reporting, but we also see that same trend in VAT determination in the SAP systems. SAP started in around 2017 or so to design the SAP localization hub and then also for the tax service. And SAP has created there a strategy to move from VAT determination in the SAP systems to a cloud-based solution. So let's do everything in a central tax engine, like Vertex, for example. SAP is creating the framework to connect SAP systems to tax engines via the localization hub. They call it the tax service, and that is where we see the future, that SAP is not doing anything in VAT determination within the SAP systems, but will move that out and we will move that into cloud applications so that not only the SAP system can benefit from that, but that you can also then connect other platforms to that cloud application, to the, for example, the Vertex tax engine, to do all your tax determination for all the financial platforms that you're using, where you're doing VAT determination upon. So that is one way where you see that SAP is moving away from doing updates in the S/4HANA system for VAT purposes. So to answer the first question, do we expect that we have a VAT solution implemented in the S/4HANA system? There's no signs from SAP that they will do anything in the SAP system. Do you need to wait with a VAT automation until you migrate to S/4HANA? If I do an interpretation of the question like that, then I would say you don't need to. We already have functionalities available also for an SAP ECC system to already connect via that SAP tax service, so via the localization hub to tax engines. So if you would now move already your ECC system, you would already upgrade that with VAT automation by the tax engine. That would then also save you a lot of troubles in migrating later on to an S/4HANA system. So I would not wait until that time, but you could already take action now with using the latest functionality and still already go to a tax engine.
Cool. Okay. We have another question here. So we have a lot of chain flows in our business model in Europe, and we struggle to customize these in native SAP. Are there any solutions available from SAP, maybe SAP Notes, that can guide us in setting these up with automated VAT determination end to end? And how do other customers in your experience deal with this?
Okay, yeah, that's really a European thing. I would say a lot of chain flows, and that really creates a lot of complexity in Europe. Yes, I think if you look at the results also back what we presented today, 98% of the customers have a issue in VAT determination. 38%, I think it was, had an issue in multiple jurisdictions. This all comes back to that same question. Everybody's struggling to customize that in native SAP. Are there any SAP nodes available for customizing complex chain flows? Unfortunately not. Like I said also with the other question, SAP is not really updating their VAT solution in the SAP system. So there's also no really SAP nodes that could guide you in setting up complex chain flows. You really need to either build that yourself or use a system like we are providing. We call it a chain flow accelerator for SAP. And that chain flow accelerator is really designed for handling complex chain flows in the SAP system. So that is also where we see other customers. Other customers till now, most of them have tried to deal with this in native SAP, but we see now since last year, we see quite a big move in the landscape where companies are now actually really looking into tax engines. They are really moving into the tax engine area to solve their complex chain flows in the SAP system. So that's the trend. We don't see anything from SAP coming, but you see that companies are really moving now to more automated solutions like a tax engine. And especially also with real-time reporting, like I said also before, you don't have the time anymore to check up your transactions. Also that is now pushing a lot of customers to buy a third-party solution like a tax engine to solve their complex chain flows.
Wonderful. Okay. I can't see any more questions in the Q&A tool. Have a look. I think that wraps it up for today in terms of content, unless anyone had any other additional questions at this point. Can't see any.
No, I also can't see any further questions.
Right. Okay, well that wraps up the content for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you really enjoyed the session, and take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes today's webcast presentation. Any questions we did not answer have been collected and will be followed up via email. On behalf of our presenters and Vertex, I want to thank you for your participation today. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.